Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, the bulls versus the bears. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on the premium list, which you can find a link to in the description below. Let's go ahead and jump in. So, I made two fairly long videos talking about Bitcoin, the case for the bulls, and the case for the bears. Okay, and I showed a lot of reasons why it makes sense to be bullish, but I also showed a lot of reasons why it makes sense to be bearish. And I think the rational investor would look at both sides and try to figure out which one is more compelling. Um, and if I look at both sides in the short term, I'm not changing my macro thesis on Bitcoin that it trends up with time. But in the short term, I do think the bearish case has more merit. And the reason, and again, when I say that, I mean I've been saying for a few weeks now that I think, I'm basically since Q1 started that I remain bearish for Q1 or neutral at best if somehow we can get back up to the yearly open by the end of March. But I do think that's a fairly unlikely scenario to play out. Um, so I think when taking all information into account and looking at the short term, at least over say the next 2 to 4 months or so, which it's really hard to predict these markets beyond. I mean, it's hard to predict these markets at all, to be completely honest. Um, and I mean, as you guys know, this top I did not get right. I'm not gonna pretend like I did. I didn't. I got this one. I got that one. But this one not so much. So at this point, what I look at the market and I just say, look, if you take everything into consideration from a macro perspective, but also looking at say like macroeconomic conditions, geopolitical conditions currently going on, but also furthermore just the fairly unattractive chart of getting it rejected off of the bull market support band. I look at that and it doesn't scream bullish to me, right? Like that doesn't scream bullish to me. It just looks like another failed retest, right? Like we had one here, another failed retest of it. So one and two in a row now, a failed retest here of the bull market support band. So when I sort of look at the market, while I can always break it down in terms of geopolitical things, macroeconomic things, from a price perspective as well, just getting rejected off of this key moving average, I think is probably enough for me to be bearish alone, right? Regardless of everything going on in the world. Um, you also consider that the dollar is still holding support on its own bull market support band. So while my macro thesis on Bitcoin, remains unchanged, right? I still think it will trend up with time. I think it is more or less governed by the logarithmic regression bands. Um, Going into the regression band, as well as going into the high risk levels back in early 2021, was more of a red flag for me. And I took a lot of profits over here. Here not so much, to be completely honest, right? Not so much. Um, but it's one of those things that for a trader, a short-term trader, I imagine this is a really nice range, right? Like constantly coming, down and up, down and up, down and up. But as a long-term investor, which I am, like I don't really trade shorter-term moves. As a longer-term investor, what I'm more interested in are these moves, right? These like parabolic moves. These moves aren't as interesting to me. Um, and I mean, I'm paying the price for it, right? I'm paying the price for it. So what I would say is, in the short term, I still think the market leans bearish, and especially when you look at things like the 1 year ROI, and I mean just a lot of things we just talked about. I do think the market remains bearish in the short term, but I do think we will turn it around later on, especially once we can reclaim some of these important levels. Remember, I mean, really for me, the market is in a bear market when we're below the bull market support band. So we've been in a bear market. People keep asking me, they're like, "Hey Ben, you know, when are we in a bear market? Right? When are we in a bear market?" I keep saying the same thing. We've been in a bear market since November. right? Since we broke below the bull market support band, this is the time. I mean, this is the time. I would say we've been in a bear market for 3 months, right? I mean, 3 months now, Bitcoin has been in a bear market. And the way I visualize it, I just look at like the, splitting it up either below the 20 week or above the 20 week. So here, if it's red, we're below it. If it's green, we're above the bull market support band, either the 20-week SMA or the 21-week EMA. And I mean, you can see that when it's red, market's bearish. When it's green, market's bullish. Right now, it's a bear market. So we'll see how long it lasts, but at least in the short term, I don't see it changing, especially after getting a pretty clear rejection here off of the bull market support band. These markets change quickly, as you can see, but first failed test, second failed test. I mean, it's just hard to look at that and say that that looks like a bullish sign. I'd be more than happy to come on here in a couple weeks and eat those words if Bitcoin can somehow muster up the courage to come back above it. But it just seems somewhat unlikely unless we see a lot of things change here in the short term. It doesn't really mean that we have to go down, to very, very low levels, like I know some people are calling for. I know some people are calling for, $5,000 Bitcoin and $10,000 Bitcoin. I don't think we're going to go that low, but I would say that it seems like the market is certainly advertising that it's leaning bearish right now, and to say otherwise is looking at the chart and ignoring it. Okay. And I don't say that. I mean, I don't say these things to, with pride or anything to say like, oh yeah, like it's bear market. I just say it because I think it's better to just call things what they are than to pretend like they're things that are not. And it actually makes these things better to navigate, easier to navigate if you can, in fact, just call it what it is. Because if you can just admit that it looks like a bear market, if it looks like a bear market, and it sounds like a bear market and it smells like a bear market, then it's probably just a bear market. And the reason why that's useful to sort of acknowledge is it means that a lot of these, especially on altcoins, right? It means that dips are not necessarily meant for buying on a lot of these alts, especially because I mean they get completely wrecked against Bitcoin during these phases. I mean, just like they did back in the summer of 2021, just like they did in the second half of 2019, just like they did in 2018. There's been plenty of these phases that have happened over the last several years. So understand that you're better off calling it what it is until proven otherwise. I called it a bear market over here as well until proven otherwise, and then here we proved otherwise. We have not yet proven otherwise over here. And so I'll continue to just think the market remains bearish until we prove otherwise. So there you have it. We have the case for the bears, the case for the bulls. On a macro perspective, you can understand both cases. In the short term, I still think the market, leans fairly bearish. So if you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel. We'll follow this every step of the way, and hopefully try to identify a future bottom wherever that might be. It's probably going to look I mean, it's always hard to identify in real time, but a lot of times they're marked with significant amounts of volume. So thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, and I will see you next time. Bye.